I want to immediately begin this video by addressing the title, which you might have noticed if you clicked on this video. Today I will be talking about a more controversial topic than usual. That is because this video is a defense of games incorporating quote-unquote woke elements, with the purpose of this video being to start a discussion on the merits of these aspects in games. To give a little background, I grew up playing with a lot of role-playing games. A lot of these games that I played dealt with issues of tolerance, discrimination, usual fantasy sci-fi stuff. And that's why I would like to extend that to the real world. And because of this video will focus primarily on the role-playing game genre, because for me they're just the most interesting to discuss, and I feel I'm confident enough in my general knowledge on the genre to be able to make this video. So I'm just immediately going to drop a bit of a bomb here. It is no secret that gaming culture hosts a lot of unapologetic racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever. And this is also noticeable within the role-playing game genre, particularly CRPGs from what I've noticed. This is probably because the most vocal, note that I'm not saying majority, the most vocal, role-playing game fans tend to be more older people. Sometimes even people who played games like Baldur's Gate when they released and participated in D&D games in the 80s and 90s. Just looking back with rose-tinted glasses, because they were young and naive at the time, it's kind of just a cycle that repeats itself of people saying, everything used to be better back then, but I progress. No, these people grew up with games like they used to be made back then, with the hero of the story typically being a strong white male character, typically burly man and the likes, and the trope of a weak, defenseless woman was often used. In nerd and gaming culture, the portrayal of women usually was as a mere sex object, probably just there because a lot of the nerds who made and played these games were horny social outcasts with no social skills. Not everyone, of course, but this trope isn't even wrong in and of itself, in my opinion, which might sound shocking. If this is honestly the kind of story a writer wants to tell and it fits their vision that they were going for, I'm fine with it, I guess. I wouldn't be very interested personally, but a writer should have the freedom to write about whatever they want, and I don't think we should limit the things that they could write about. Unfortunately, however, many people haven't moved on from these times. These days games can have different writing than they used to, with generally more freedom for the creators of games to tell the stories that they want to tell. Of course, I should note that there wasn't any shimmer of what was to come in the good old days. A good example that I can think of from the top of my head is Quina from Final Fantasy IX, who I'm pretty sure is gender neutrally addressed, which, in a game from I don't know how many decades old it is pretty cool. Things like that existed back then too in real life and even in some games, but just generally in a more limited capacity. But as the gaming and general nerd sphere expanded, so did the people who would be making these games and playing them. In general, the gaming landscape is more diverse than ever, with so many different types of people enjoying the same hobby of playing video games. This also extends to the people who make these games. As society and the gaming culture gets more diverse, so do the people who end up making these games that we play. Of course, I think we still have a long way to go in general with regards to diversity, but we've come a long way since the olden days. And I don't think that this is some sort of political or woke issue, as some of these hardcore gamers might say. People like this have always existed in real life and in video games. Today's society, however, allows these people to speak up more and live their own lives however they want to live it. And women have started being more involved in the process of making games too, and with that comes more fleshed out female characters that just don't fall in the same archetypes. Of course, this doesn't automatically mean everything is perfect. Some games now just have big burly women instead of men, so while there has been attention directed towards the diversity in games to reflect the ever-changing demographic of gaming culture, we shouldn't forget that at the end of the day, people will still demand good writing in the media they consume. But all in all, I think it's a positive thing games are becoming more diverse. Which brings me to my next point, which I find pretty goofy. Games have always been political. The argument that people make that politics don't belong in games is just ignorant. Politics has always existed in gaming and other media. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that all games are political or have to be political. But politics has existed in fiction for about as long as fiction has existed. People just don't like politics in games if it's something that they personally disagree with. including a transgender or gay character in a game, or even just including a woman that isn't some helpless sex slave, doesn't make a game political. If that is a story that a writer wants to tell, I'm all for it. And these are the same type of people that would complain that they can't make openly homophobic statements, while at the same time warning people that they should reconsider buying a game because it includes a lesbian couple or whatever. But at that point, the same freedoms don't apply, I guess. Recently been some controversy of Metacritic deleting some homophobic reviews on a certain video game. I don't remember which one specifically. But the people were, all up in arms on the forums saying, yeah, oh, the freedom of expression and whatever the fuck not. But when a writer wants to do that in a game, it's suddenly wrong. And what's also funny to me is that so many people complain of politics in fantasy games, for example, as if they haven't noticed that the fantasy genre, from its birth, from its inception, hasn't been pretty much inherently political. I mean, elves in fantasy settings being discriminated against because they are different from the majority in that world really isn't something that is drawn from real life issues. And, this setting of the elves being oppressed is as old as fantasy is pretty much. But, these old fantasy games just weren't political, not like these days. But my point is, politics has always existed in games, just like the topics of gender identity, or the existence of women who don't just want to fuck the author insert main character. The difference is that these days it's more often used in writing because, well, first of all, it is the popular thing to do, I have to admit that, but also just because the people making these games are more varied than ever as the world of video games and nerd culture in general grows. Although, admittedly, the execution can still be slightly, bad. A lot of the efforts to create a more diverse game may have been made with the right intentions, but failed because it was either written by someone with little knowledge about the subject matter, or the developers just were too afraid to double down and put some actual effort in it because they knew what the common response was going to be from gamers. So I agree that the practical implementation of these new, quote-unquote new, types of characters should be done better and more realistically at times. A transgender or female or gay or non-binary or whatever character should be given just as much development and care as the usual cast of characters get. So this is my big question. Why should a developer not be able to include a gay character in their game? Or a transgender character, or for that matter, any fucking character if it adds something to the world the creators envisioned. Why should a developer not have a more fleshed out female character, and how is that considered quote-unquote woke or quote-unquote political? You see, when playing a role-playing game, an important factor for me is the freedom to play as whatever I want. If I, as a admittedly straight white male, want to roleplay as a transgender kleptomaniac, why should I not have that option? Freedom of choice is a foundation, is a pillar of the role-playing genre. And this freedom of choice should also extend to the people who are outside of what was considered to be the main demographic of role-playing games and D&D back then. If someone who happens to be gay or a woman, or political for that matter, plays a game, why shouldn't they have the option to be represented in a game? And why should the cast of characters not reflect that? I would love to have a well-developed trans or gay character because I'm a sucker for good stories, no matter what they might look like. The entire point of role-playing is giving the controls to the player and letting them create their own story and whoever they want to be like, just like D&D, which most role-playing games are based on. So why should that be limited to just straight white males? Something people might not realize is that the game you are playing might also be played by people who are not you. So why should you be the only one that is represented in a video game? I mean, Fallout New Vegas is interesting to talk about in that it seems to be very popular with people from the LGBT community from what I've noticed. But that game, as far as big name Western RPGs go, has a lot of freedom in who you want to be. I mean, the mechanics of the game allow you to be bisexual or gay. And I love that the option is there, even if I might not take it in my playthrough. This does not mean a game is pandering to woke culture, quote unquote. It just allows you to roleplay with more choices. And the same can be said for a game like The Sims. Why should a life sim, including more options of living, be considered political? Why do people say that LGBT themes or more female characters is political and woke anyway? You're literally making it political by saying it is, and people just use the term woke for everything they personally disagree with, no matter what the context. As a side note, something that people just might not realize is that a lot of people use video games as a sort of escape in that in the real world they might not be their true selves, but in a video game they can roleplay as their true selves. Let's say, for example, that you live in a very repressive state or country or whatever, in where you aren't allowed to be truly yourself. You are limited by, you know, the views of the others around you, or you have very strict and conservative parents. A video game might just allow you to roleplay as someone who you want to be in real life, and, you know, just try to wrap your head around the idea of that you could be different too, and if your life would be improved by that. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, because who cares what you want to do? If you think that you would be happier, then go for it. And video games are so perfect for that, because they allow you to create your own character. Some games are so good that they're better than the real world in regards to the freedom you get and the options you can choose. So I think that is something that people should keep in mind, that what you might think is pandering, woke, political, whatever, for some people it might be a very big deal. I mean, I can only imagine the excitement that seeing a character in a game that is like you would bring. Which brings me to my next point, which, to be honest, is the whole discussion in and of itself. In my opinion, there are a lot of people who undervalue the medium of video games as an art form. And games are art. Games are up there with books, TV, and music. When I listen to a piece of music and watch a movie or whatever, something that can interest me is an artist's vision. And I think that an artist should have complete control over what they want to write about, and if they are allowed to write about something, even if it is considered controversial. If a writer envisions a world, and that world has characters in it that happen to be gay or trans or whatever, it shouldn't automatically detract from the experience. Even if you disagree with their inclusion, and everybody is of course entitled to their opinions, you should at least acknowledge that a creator has chosen to include it in their vision. You aren't entitled to a game with no quote-unquote woke themes, because you are not the one who created the game. It would be like me writing Harry Styles that he should stop with his androgynous persona and just start writing songs about how hard it is to be an incel. And if you are a raging homophobic sexist that can't stand seeing other people happy that they have the option to roleplay in a role-playing video game, you should honestly just move on to ruin the next thing with your presence. And no, I don't think that these words are too harsh, because what excuse do people have to complain about a game including even a single gay character? When Mass Effect 3 at its core test, the single fully gay character in the entire trilogy, as far as I know, there was this big controversy surrounding it, and I'm an absolutely huge Mass Effect fan, and I can't understand why anybody would be bothered about that. I mean, this is BioWare's universe, I'm just along for the ride, but I can still criticize some of the bad decisions that they made. So one thing that I should make perfectly clear right now is that bad writing is still bad writing, and it doesn't matter if a character is gay or straight or a bisexual dwarven priest. It is perfectly fine to still critique a game's writing, but doing so solely on the fact that it happens to include something you like is just wrong. A writer's vision is an important thing, and although it is an important thing, it can still be criticized or discussed or critiqued. And as with any art form, a video game's writer should have the freedom to fully be able to implement their vision, even if this vision happens to include a gay shuttle pilot. This vision isn't a holy thing, however, and the implementation can and should be able to be discussed or even criticized. So, I wanted to make this video after reading some of the Steam reviews for games like Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous, and the Siege of Dragonspear add-on from Baldur's Gate 1. Those reviews show the sentiment I've come across a lot on the internet, sadly. Some of these reviews genuinely upset me, because these people just don't understand what role-playing means. I am endlessly passionate about role-playing games. I grew up playing them, and these games have always let me escape to another world. To see people talk about role-playing games that are this ignorant annoys me to no end. And there isn't a right way to think, so to say, but my ultimate goal is to make video games as discussable as something like music or movies already is. This video probably won't make any diehards change their mind, but I would honestly be happy if anyone watching this at least gets reminded to look at things a little differently from time to time. I feel like a lot of hardcore gamers can be very narrow-minded. And to reiterate, the point of this video is not to say that you can't honestly critique things or disagree with others. You don't have to like these things in games. But you could at least see that there are different kinds of people that might play the same games as you. So even if something doesn't particularly interest or apply to you, someone else's life might change because of it. So feel free to critique whatever bad writing you want. Just don't hate on something because it is different. To wrap things up, I honestly didn't mean to come off as preachy in this video. My intent was just to start a discussion and bring up a topic that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough. And to bring up an important value for me personally and something I hope to see more of. As a huge music nerd, I would love to see if video games were talked about the same way as a good album might. When I listen to an album, I love it if an artist's vision shines through. And games are art, as I already said, and you might already know. And art is subjective. But if you stop looking at games as something that should totally only appeal to you and otherwise has no merit, and more as the creative vision of a team of artists, it can be so much more interesting. And since games are art, you don't have to like or even agree with anything or everything. There's plenty of albums that I really dislike, for example, but that does not mean it holds no value for anyone. And calling games quote-unquote woke or quote-unquote political for having a strong female character, or whatever you might not like, is just a baseless accusation most of the times. Keep that in mind. It would be more productive to analyze the quality of the writing instead of what it is about. Anyway, again, thanks for watching. I'm not saying this is the correct way to live or whatever. I just want to encourage people to look at things a little different way now and then. This video is also very different from the couple of other ones that I've made before, but this is just something that I am very passionate about and felt an urge to make. And if you have really watched to the end and have anything specific to say about something I mentioned, or that you disagree with, or that you agree with, whatever, please comment. I don't mind. So yeah, thanks for watching. Goodbye.